Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa. I am here yet again, another week, bringing you another discussion that hopefully will help you enrich your sex life. You know, part of what I do on the show, of course, is talk about sex, and part of what I try to do in my sex therapy practice is to help you talk about sex, help you talk with your partner. Sometimes that does wonders just by itself, opening up the conversation, starting to address it. Sometimes you don't even need therapy after that, right? Like this thing, it seems so big and so daunting and so intimidating. But if you can open up the conversation with your partner, there's a lot that relaxes, that sort of settles out, that opens up for you guys to work together and actually make changes that can maybe easily improve your intimate life together. I actually developed a guide for talking about sex with your partner. Totally free. It's on my website, sexwithoutstress.com, or you can go to bettersexpodcast.com/guide and get your hands on it. Free download. Hopefully it'll be helpful. So today's topic, I'm actually going to be back on my soapbox. That's what I call these episodes that I do by myself without a guest. Climbing up on my soapbox, talking about something that I feel passionate about, that matters to me, that I talk to clients about all the time. And this is one of my favorites, actually. It's not quite the graduate level of sex therapy, but this is the conversation we have when the basics are going right. You know, when I've gotten people communicating with each other, addressing their concerns in their sex life, starting to relax and enjoy and have this be playful again, that's when we start talking about eroticism. So that's going to be the conversation today. I'm going to talk all about what eroticism is, why it's important, how to explore yours, and especially how to share that with your partner and figure out what in the world you're going to do with what turns you on. I hope you find it useful. So the topic today is eroticism, as I said in the intro, and I think we have to start with a definition. And I actually didn't even look this up. I remember when I looked this up once, it was like, oh, the thing's being erotic. Okay, what does this mean? To me, eroticism is our really unique fingerprint of what turns us on. It's a set of things, or the theme of things, that really arouses us, that we find highly interesting, that we respond to, that, the word erotic, right? That we find erotic, that we really flips our switch. And we each have this. It's like our erotic fingerprint, our template of the kinds of things that we respond to. Now, we may or may not understand what that is or have explored that. You may be listening and thinking, I don't even know what you're talking about. Or maybe you're listening thinking, I know exactly what you're talking about. But we all have the things that we prefer in sex and the things that we find more arousing than others. So this is a useful concept and a useful area of inquiry if we're going to make our sex life as good as we can. Now, I've actually thought that if I were ever to go back and do a PhD, this is what I would study, is eroticism. I just find it fascinating. And one of the theories that I ascribe to was developed by a guy named Bader, Bader, who wrote a great book called Arousal, The Secret Logic of Sexual Fantasies. And he talks about his theory that our eroticism, what we find especially arousing, frees us from guilt and shame. So it moves those obstacles out of the way so that we can be fully aroused. So let me give you an example. As I recall, I may not have this totally right, but as I recall, his book opened with this story of this woman who was a very powerful executive. She's a feminist. This is who she was in her real life. But her sexual fantasy, her eroticism, was to be sort of taken by, I think it was the janitor or something. This was really distressing to her because how could she put together her vision of herself as a strong, powerful woman with being sort of manhandled, or that's not quite the language, that's my own word, taken in this way that didn't match who she thought about herself in real life. And in exploring this with this client or this woman for the book, it became clear that that's exactly why that was her fantasy. In real life, she was so powerful and so strong that not only did she sort of not want to be that, but she was absolved of the guilt of overpowering people. If she were overpowered in her fantasies, then she could let go of the burden of being strong, or does somebody else want what she's doing, and, overpowering others. That's what allowed her to become fully, fully aroused. So this theory that what turns us on is related to our guilt, our shame, our self-consciousness, or our lack of permission or something like that, I find really, really intriguing. It's not like you need to go figure out exactly what this is for you, but I think it's an interesting line of inquiry if you're curious about it. I highly recommend the book in terms of trying to figure out why exactly does your eroticism exist? What does it absolve you of? What does it relieve for you? The other part I think is important to talk about is why is it important to even explore eroticism? So in some ways, you may have been going along having sex with your partner for a long time. It hasn't been highly erotic and it's been just fine. And that's actually part of the problem. It may have been just fine. We tend over time, maybe not even over that much time, to come down to what a colleague of mine called lowest common denominator sex. So we take off the table anything that makes you uncomfortable, anything that takes me uncomfortable. We're working with the overlap that we have of things that are easy. And it's kind of like leftovers, and that's what we do together for quite a long time. We're not pushing the edges. We let go of the things that maybe test us or challenge us, or that we're not sure how well our partner's going to receive. And sometimes some of the stuff that is erotic to us, we do really believe our partner may not welcome. So we avoid that for a while. And so we may be having sex that, works just fine and maybe even is really fun, right? But over time starts to feel a little bit mundane, a little bit boring. Maybe there's room to explore what could re-energize your sex life. There is tremendous power in our eroticism. It's like turbo fuel for the fire. It's highly arousing. That's the definition of it. The content of this for us has a lot of fuel. That's really useful for reinvigorating a sex life, for finding new energy, for making it more engaging than the sort of Wednesday night sex we may have gotten used to. And, another thing, I think I've talked about this in a previous podcast, but, the stimulation that we need to get aroused, to be orgasmic, we require more of that as we get older. So not only is our sex life becoming a little bit more predictable if we're with the same partner, usually, but we tend to need more fuel on the fire to get aroused or to reach an orgasm as we age, as we have more stress, as we have more responsibilities. So tapping into our eroticism is a great way to up the stimulation, because that is mental stimulation. If you've ever heard the saying that our brain is our biggest sex organ, that's what that means to me. Eroticism is mental. It's often not about like a particular sex act, or at least the physical sensation of that sex act. It's about the mental meaning that we've made of it. It's about the sort of themes of energetics and power, or, there's a range of things people find erotic, but it's way more mental than it is physical. So that's got a lot of power. And if we add that mental stimulation, we get our brain engaged. The meaning of this is highly charged. That's a lot of fuel for the fire. That's a lot more added stimulation. Much, much easier to get over those bars, as we get older, in terms of what we need to really get turned on. So that's what eroticism is, and that's what I think it's important to explore it and add it, or at least have it as an option. It's not like all of our sex has to sort of peg the meter, but I think we want the flexibility to incorporate this to some degree.
Hey, it's Jessa here, just taking a quick break in the show. So glad you're with me today. I want to invite you to be a part of the conversation. I run a free Facebook group called Sex, Intimacy, and Relationships. And I share articles and resources. I foster conversation and community. I'm there to answer questions if you post them. And I broadcast live, delivering information, ideas, inspiration that could help you with your sex life. I'd love to have you join me there. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/community.
So how do you explore what your eroticism is? Now, again, some of you listening are going to have a very clear picture already of what this is for you. But some of you, this may be a totally new concept, or you really don't know, or you think, well, I don't fantasize, it can be hard to discern if you haven't thought about it. So your eroticism is revealed in a few different ways. Okay, one of them is potentially your sexual preferences. If you think about the best sex you've ever had, or the sex that was the most exciting, or what you like to do, that might point you in the direction of what you find highly arousing. Another place you can look is in your reaction to sexual material, or maybe even romantic material. So if you watch pornography, if you read written erotica, you'll get a sense of what you respond to and what you maybe seek out. Because there's so much stuff out there, right? We don't respond equally to all of it. We're going to be drawn towards things that really start to show us, shine a light on what we find erotic. But even if you're not, or even if you have not sought out highly erotic material, you may read romance novels. You might respond to scenes in TV or movies or novels. There's stuff out there. There's fodder, grist for the mill in the world. So pay attention to what gets you going a little bit, right? What flips that switch? What's that's, now I'm feeling a little bit horny or something. Watch for those things. And if you haven't noticed that, or you're not coming across it, maybe you want to seek out some erotic material on purpose and start to sort of test the waters. What draws your attention? There's actually another great book, and I interview the author, and it's going to be in another episode released pretty soon, Justin Lehmiller, who did a bunch of research. I think he heard from a couple thousand people about their fantasies and their eroticism, and there were 7 main themes that most people sort of fit into in terms of the things that turn them on. So his book would be another place to kind of look and get a little bit of the scope and context of what people respond to, and maybe you'll get some idea of, oh, right, I lean this direction, not that one. The last place I recommend you, the third place, not the last place you should look, the other place you can look for your eroticism is in your sexual fantasies. So if you fantasize, or if you could begin to fantasize, that is really pure erotic material, because we don't put stuff in there that doesn't work for us. It takes away from our arousal, right? So unlike a scene in pornography or a movie, or unlike a story that was written by someone else where we might have to overlook some things, or I'm not really paying attention to this, I'm paying attention to that, our own creations really reflect our eroticism. So whether you want to, just examine your sexual fantasies, spend a little bit of time there, whether you want to write some of these out, that can be a great place to really hone in on the themes of what turns you on. So once you understand your eroticism, the next step is really to share that with your partner, right? To learn theirs and to share yours with them. So I can't stress this enough, encourage you to adopt a stance of curiosity, no judgment. Set the stage to have a conversation and start to explore what really turns you each on. without any sense that you have to do anything about this yet, that there's anything that it means, that anything is good or bad. You're really trying to create a welcoming space to learn this about each other. There's no judgment. Nothing is off limits in our mind. Now, there are things we cannot do in real life. Okay, there are things that are non-consensual, that are illegal, that are not okay. But anything that goes on in the brain is okay. It's serving us in some way. So resist any temptation to judge each other and try to create a welcoming, curious place to just understand this about each other. So the whole first part of this process is just to create that understanding, just to learn, we're not making any decisions yet about what to do with any of it, okay? So what I recommend is that people start by sharing some of those scenes that you respond to. Whether you show each other some porn scenes, you read or let them read an erotic story that you found online, you share that scene from that TV show that really lit you up, or the scene from your romance novel, whatever it is, take a couple of them and share them with each other. And you probably have to talk about what part of this, what moment, what gesture, what tone, what word, whatever it is, where is the hook for you in this? Because again, with other people's material, it's like, well, ignore that. It's not about that part, but this is what really turns me on. And to have a discussion and exploration about that with each other. And then, you watch your partner's stuff too, and really see if you can get the flavor of each other's eroticism. Then you might share your sexual fantasies. Now, like I said, these are way more personal. This is like pure erotic material. So it can be more difficult to start there. But once you have this sort of common ground and this curiosity, you might share your own fantasies. And again, whether you say them to each other or you write it out as a story or whatever, that's just delving that much deeper into what really turns you on. So you come out of this process with a real knowledge of yourself and your partner. And I think you're going to begin to see the overlap. How do these two eroticisms, I'm not sure I can make a plural noun like that, how could they go together? Like, I generally believe that people don't get together unless there's at least some overlap. I mean, I'm not going to say that in an absolute 100%, but I think largely there's room to play. There's room to put these together. Now, it doesn't mean that what you find erotic, that what you fantasize about, doesn't mean you want to do it. Okay, there's a big difference between I want to do this thing or act it out or have this experience versus I find it really hot to think about and imagine, but I don't want to do it. So that's clarity that you want to get. And even if one of you wants to do it, maybe the other doesn't. Right? So you're going to have to talk about what are you going to do with this information? In what ways do you want to implement it? Do you want to act out a scene? Do you want to do part of it? Do you want to start slow and dip your toe in the water and do a little bit of it? Or would you rather just talk about it? In the middle of sex or leading up to sex, talk as if this thing were going to happen, is about to happen, just happen. You can pull it in terms of fantasy together in a shared way by talking and imagining it. Or maybe you'll decide it's okay for one or the other of you to fantasize about your eroticism, but it's not something that is actively shared between the two of you in your encounter. Okay, so there's different ways to harness some of that energy that are not just as black and white as we're either going to totally do this thing or we're not, right? How do you pull some of this in? And especially, how do you pull in parts that work together, that hit your button and your partner's button? Is there some way to sort of assemble sexual encounters and imagination that rings the bell for both of you, basically, right? And where you can't, where there isn't an overlap, where there are things that are just, like a turn off to your partner, which is definitely possible. Still don't want you judging each other, but it could be that something that really turns on one person turns off the other. That's where you get to keep that for solo sex, right? For masturbation, for fantasy. It's not like you have to cut that part out of your sexual identity or enjoyment, but it may be something that you can't share with this partner. And that needs to be okay too, right? you're working with another person whose desires and wishes and eroticism also matter. So everywhere that you can get overlap and you can play together and you can harness that, wonderful. And where you can't, just keep that for you. I mean, that's sort of the basic outline of how I cover this with clients. I hope that's helpful. So it's, figure out what it is for you, figure out how to talk about it with your partner, and then figure out what you're going to do about it, if anything. I can't stress enough how powerful I think this is and how useful I think it can be in your sex life. And again, not every time you have sex. It's not like it's got to be highly erotic or pegging the meter or totally charged every time. But it's nice to have some of this to draw on and to have a little bit of variety and a little bit of variance in, I guess I'd say, how arousing sex is. Like there's places to pull it out and make it hotter. And then there's other times where we just sort of want a simple, moderately warm encounter, right? They're all okay, but this gives you some flexibility. Hope you enjoy that.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.